Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. Today we'll be talking about you can't manage what you don't measure. We'll be looking at how to use L&D data effectively. If anyone is having any problems with their audio or logging in, we've got a URL at the top as a sticky note, which is our FAQ sheet, so have a look through that can hopefully help you. One thing we would suggest, if you are using Internet Explorer, to please change to Chrome. Thank you.
Hello everybody, my name is Jez Anderson. I'm the Head of Consulting at Kineo. I'm delighted to be here this afternoon, working alongside Laura Overton from Toward Maturity. We'll be, during the next hour, we'll be giving you an opportunity to share some of the most recent research that Laura and the team at TM have been working on, and share a little bit of my thoughts and views from Kineo's perspective as well. Hopefully we can get a bit of a lively discussion going on the chat board with your questions and your responses to the information that you're hearing. Ultimately, what we're trying to do over the next hour is just explore and kick around a little bit what we mean by measurement and why is it important to all of us within the L&D community. It's not necessarily anything new, and I've been around quite a long time from an L&D perspective, and I've been talking about doing it for a long time. I'm never quite getting there, and I suppose in some ways I'm not alone in that. So realistically, what we're trying to do is give an opportunity to explore and understand what's behind all this and what's behind our shifting relationship with data, and what's expected of us as a community now as we move forward. I think the key thing is that, as we see it, that tools are really important. And I know at Kineo we have partners that we work alongside who are great at providing us with the key tools. If we want to, that's it, brilliant. So why it matters is, in some ways, is that it's looking at these key tools, how we use them, how we can get the most from the technology to help and support us understand the impact that what we produce has on our organisations. What we've been thinking about and what our partners are thinking about is not just looking at data as just information, just statistics, but looking more at how we can utilize that data to inform us better. And it's taking it beyond just looking at simple engagement data, simple how many people signed on, how long did it take people to go through a program, but starting to understand and correlate the links between data that might not necessarily be the first port of call for L&D. So how do we look at business performance data? How do we look at the behaviours associated with business performance and relationships with learning and development? And then how can we tap that back into the questions that we ask of the data that's readily available to us? So this hour, realistically, is about supporting that. So we're about trying to help businesses achieve measurable impact through learning and technology, bringing those two things together. We have some key partners, HT2 Labs, Learning Locker, that works very closely with us using XAPI technologies. We're trying to work with them to bring in greater personalisation, to understand more about how people use learning and development to improve their performance. And importantly, we also work with Filtered as well, looking at how to use AI better as a better engine. Closely working with Towards Maturity, as many of us are, which is great. And clearly what we're trying to do is look at how we can support learning and development professionals moving forward. So without any more conversation from me, for this point anyway, I'm going to hand over to Laura, who's going to step us through the most recent research that they've been working on. Laura, over to you.
That's great, Jez. Thank you so much. And our goal at Towards Maturity, we're a firm of learning analysts. We're just looking to help use data to help us all make smarter decisions. And I think this is the really critical thing that holds all of us together. There's nearly 40 of us in the webinar today. Kineo Ag Prime sponsor of this program. We've worked with HT2, we've worked with Filtered, but actually what we want to do is say, okay, well, how can we use data to make smart decisions and to demonstrate the impact that we're delivering? And really, our study was about understanding our relationship with data. I don't know about you, but I don't know very many learning and development professionals who've got into this industry because we're passionate about numbers. Actually, we're passionate about people, and I think this is one of the critical things. And so data has come and hit our industry massively. I've been working in the industry for a few decades now, and technology has been turning learning upside down. Jez has already talked about the tools that we use, but now not only do we have to understand the plethora of tools and how do we blend and how do we address performance and provide a service in that context, but we're also being asked to consider data, analytics, big data, small data, AI. It is confusing. So really what we want to do over the next hour is to look at what we can learn together about our personal relationship with data. And the more you can share in the chat room with us today, then that would be absolutely brilliant. What we did is that we conducted a quick pulse. Traditionally, Towards Maturity are very much known for our health check, which is running at the moment, where learning professionals like yourselves, we kind of stop and review our full system of learning and development, our full strategy, so almost like a full body health check. But now and then we take a quick pulse on our health in a particular area. We've looked at leadership, we've looked at compliance, but this was the first time we've taken a data pulse about our relationship with data. And really, people who participated in this process were from all over the world and from all sizes of organizations, and equally from all sectors as well. And this quick snapshot is going to be released in a week or so's time, but we wanted to share with you some of the findings to be able to stimulate conversation today. And you know what? The research and data is not about what do the numbers say, but it's about how does this stimulate us to think differently. So one of our core questions is about our relationship with data and how it's changing. And for those of you who've got access, It would be great if you could perhaps go into the chat room, click on the little square box with the 3 dots. Right at the bottom of the screen, there's an opportunity to type your message. Make sure that it's clicked on chat and clicked on to everybody, so it's not just us behind the scenes that see your comment. But it would be really great to understand your perspective on our relationship with data. You know, what data have we gathered in the past? What do we need to look at in the future? Is it all about impact? Jez started this. This is typically the place where most of us start. You know, how do we demonstrate our value back into the business? But it would be great to hear your thoughts on how you think about data and if it's changed in the last year or so. So please share your thoughts in the chat room. I'm going to give you an opportunity to be able to do that now. And it will be great to have that come up, and then we can kind of comment and start the conversation together. So I know some of you are having a few problems in connecting. If you're not on Chrome, you may have a bit of a problem, but hopefully you'll be able to come through. Anya, thank you. If I was a prize, I'd give you one. So knowing I need to collect it, but not sure how. It'd be great to know, Anya, about what are you looking to collect? Kelsey, starting on data on the way that we experience kind of content, I guess, from a technical side. That's a new thing for us as well, looking at data on the user experience. Who else thinks that the data with relationship with data is changing? Helena, thank you. See and measure business impact, not to participation. I think that's a really important point. I think we want to be able to do that. I agree with you completely. Thanks, it's coming in there, Matt. More granular data, you're saying, rather than the big picture to improve effectiveness. So there's a real theme coming through about, you know, who is collecting what and how long they're in that process, the experience of people, the granular experience, and also the bigger picture as well. Renata, thanks for your comments there. As they're coming through, Jez, if you want to put your microphone on, is there anything that you're seeing working with the customers at Kineo of a different perspective in data over the last couple of years? Jez, if you've got some comments as well, that would be great to hear.
Sure, I think the key for us is that we see a real mixture. I think it's fair to say that there's a lot of people still, you know, they're quite happy with performance data in terms of how many people go through a program, and that'll do. But increasingly, more and more at the starting, at the front end of a project, even before we put, you know, finger to keyboard in writing a piece of e-learning, that people are starting to ask the question about, well, how will this not just impact on the learner, but how will it impact on the business?
Yeah.
And asking us to help them understand what the levers that they need to pull are to do that, which takes us into asking the right questions of data. I know this is the thing we'll come back to later on in the presentation, but it's this thing about, well, what questions are we actually asking of data, so we know what we've got to try and understand as the end point. It's trying to get much more deeper into impact and effect, really.
Yeah, and I think that's really interesting. And I think, Ahmed, you're talking also about being up to date and understanding the changing needs of the learners, and that kind of links in to Jez, to what you're saying as well, is, you know, do we understand what we're getting into before we even start the design process? And you know, we're coming into some challenges here as well, and Erin, I think your point there also links back to Jez's comment about how do we connect data to show alignment with the business objectives, you know. And I think these are really critical questions for us to be asking around data at the moment, and we knew you would be an open-minded group of people. Please keep the conversation flowing. We have no problem with you talking with each other as well as listening to some of the areas. But you know, one of the things that we asked in this data pulse is not just about what data, our relationships data, but what are our expectations of data. And it's really interesting that we've been able to reflect some of the things that you've been saying here in the chat room. And I think, you know, pretty much everyone who took part in this study was that, you know, how do we use data to make the right decisions faster. So for example, 97% of us wanted to use data to ensure evidence-based decisions, and that might be in design that you've already talked about, but it might be in, what decision do I need to make best? Is this working? Could be one of the decisions that we're making. But also that we want to be able to use data to help us respond faster to what's going on around us and to help us to solve problems, to move the business forward. So again, your comments here about, Erin, about the data that aligns to business objectives, how do we make those decisions? So that was one group of action areas that we found that learning and development professionals were hungry to use data in. But also, how do we use data to help us make smart recommendations, not just in the latest in machine learning to adapt to learning, how do we ensure that when someone logs on in a tool that they get the thing that works for them rather than the sheep dip approach, but also this concept of how do we benchmark with peers? How do we know what each other are doing so that we know how to put forward our own recommendations in the light of what's going on? I think I can't pronounce your name properly. Please forgive me, Mache. Your comment there about experimenting, and gathering data and adapting, making those smart recommendations, I think is a really important and well-made point. The other area that we uncovered is that we do want to look at impact, but we've framed it in a slightly different way. It's very clear from us that how do we know that we are solving the problems that we set out to solve? And also, how can we show that we can be accountable for solving those problems? So it was very clear that learning and development are looking to data not just to demonstrate impact, but to show that our credibility, our accountability of contributing to the business situation here. And 90% of us also want to shift compliance behavior. So it's not just about ticking the box, but changing the way we want to change compliance behavior. So we know that there's a business problem out there, a skills problem, a behavior problem, an attitude problem. We don't just want to prove that we've done a great job, but we want to prove that we're in the same game as the business. And I think that's really important for learning and development. And coming back to some of your points earlier, it's about the user experience. It's about not just the design, but how do we win the hearts and minds of stakeholders, and how can we capture data? So these are some of the things that we found that learning professionals today are turning to data and say, can you help me do some of these things? So this is what's important to me right now. And again, I don't know if any of this is resonating with you. Do please feel free to comment through on that. So we then asked a question about, okay, if we've got these high aspirations of data being help us to make great decisions, to make recommendations, to be able to adapt, to change, to illustrate our accountability, where are we at the moment? What kind of data are we comfortable with? And you've really reflected in your comments so far some of the things that we're comfortable with. We're absolutely comfortable with data on activity. I don't know whether this resonates with you, but we're pretty cool at capturing the number of hours spent, the dropout rates, the number of active users, who's in, who's not, when are they in, and also the extent to which people are connecting and engaging with their online programs. So we're hot on completion rates. We're getting more and more of us are looking at ratings, looking at this kind of, does this work for me? Would you recommend this? And also 2 in 5 of us are collecting opinions of users. This to me is a really interesting point, because I think as learning professionals, we often think about data as being purely numbers, but actually stories are data as well. And in fact, my favorite quote from Brené Brown is that she says, that people's stories are data with soul, and capturing those stories, analyzing those stories is a really critical part of our role in this. And so we're certainly capturing a certain amount of data on engagement. When it comes down to performance, And again, I think this comes back to your comments a little bit earlier. Only 2 in 5 of us are saying, okay, well, what are the business performance indicators? Asking the right question up front, say, what indicators are we looking to track? And to what extent are we tracking those business indicators? You know, that is less of a comfort area. Equally, something that is easier for us to do, but still only 2 in 5 of us are doing it, is actually seeking manager feedback on outcomes, on performance of learner. Have people applied what they've been sent away to learn? And do the managers think that? We're not tracking that. And we're not tracking things like budget and head count that much either. In terms of head count, what we mean here by is, you know, people who are coming, people who are going within the organization. Fewer of us still are looking at data outside of our own sphere. So within that, we're talking about things like who's doing what outside, who is successful outside of our organization, and what can we learn from them. Only 30% do that. Only 30% are looking at industry and sector data, and only 31% are looking at data from our staff. You know, capturing, we know this, this actually correlates with our main health check process, where having a proactive voice of your learners is a really significant factor in shifting organization culture. And we found that only 30% of learning and development professionals around the globe consistently over the last 3 years are proactive in understanding the voice of their learner outside of the context of our learning intervention, but in their own context. You know, how do our staff learn what they need to do our job? So we're not capturing that level of data. And coming back to your comments a little bit earlier about user experience and design and analytics, we are not capturing behavior, people's behaviors inside a technical experience. We're not capturing the impact of campaigns in the same way a marketeer would. We're slightly more likely to be capturing is somebody accessing of their mobile or of, you know, their PlayStation late at night. So the experiences is we're not necessarily capturing through that data. So, you know, our relationship with these different types of data are very, very different. And, you know, Helena, you're talking here about productivity measure is the big challenge. How can we measure it and how can we relate it back to work? And I think I'd like us to come back to that. I think that's the really important question that I'd like Jez to perhaps look at the end of today, because data capture starts from the point of design. And if we ask the right questions at the point of design, it will then help us decide what do we need to capture through that process in order to understand productivity measurement. It is big. We need to break it down. And to be honest, Helena, this is one of the reasons why we wanted to do this study, to say, okay, well, how do we break it down? So we've got these aspirations about wanting to change the world with data, prove impact, solve solutions, increase credibility, all of those kind of things. We know what kind of data we're currently comfortable with. The challenge is that we are struggling to achieve those goals. You remember before we talked about making the right decisions, evidence-based decisions, solving decision, accelerating change. Actually, you know, only less than 50% of us are successful in ensuring evidence-based decisions and accelerating change. You know, 58% of us are successful in solving problems with evidence. So, you know, we've got a way to go, not only in this area, but also in the area of making smart recommendations. You know, earlier, all of us want to look at new ways of adapting learning to personal requirements. It's so high, 70% of us, only 12% of us are successful at the moment. And it's one of the reasons why we've teamed up with Filtered in this study as well, to, you know, because they're contributing to this 12% success rate, but what are they doing differently? And I think this is really important. We're also struggling when it comes down to that business impact. So Helena, you're not alone there about increasing the impact, the productivity goals. This is a big gap for us, and creating great experiences as well. So here's the challenge that we saw in this study. We want to do lots with data. We've got a certain level of relationship, but what we're gathering so far is not helping us to address our aspirations. It's clear that we're being held back because the desire to use data smartly is there for all of us. You've heard enough of me. Let's hear from you. What do you think is holding us back? Helene, thank you for driving that through. Is that productivity measure? It's tough. I think that's one of the challenges you're flagging there. But what about anybody else? What's holding us back from achieving some of our goals with the way that we use data? I'm going to hand over to you for the chat room for a moment while I take a sip of water. Oh, thanks for being honest, Chloe there. Fear of the truth. Love it. What about everyone else? Yeah, Renata. It's not easy. We hear you. We hear you. Time, resources, support, expertise, Elena. Yes, definitely. I think that's a really critical aspect there. And again, repeating what Renata was saying there too. Yeah, Erin, your point there as well, Michaela. You make a good point there. I'm going to try your name again. I bet I won't be able to get it right the second time. Mache, technology, the right technology, the tools. You know, tech can be an amazing opportunity to help us harness data, but it can also hold us back as well. So, you know, the right software tools in the right place at the right time, I think, is the most critical thing for us there. So that's great. Any others who've got some views on this? Yeah, Jez.
So I'd say that, you know, one of the things is that to be effective in this space it's a whole skill set. It's an expertise. I think somebody put there about, you know, a lack of knowledge or a lack of understanding. You know, we professionals. We have learned our trade and our skill in how to communicate, how to give information. We're not data specialists.
Yeah.
You know, if we look at Anya's, I'm going to move into this point, Anya, it's great, too much like maths. We're humanists. We tend to come from a humanistic background in terms of research methodologies. And what we're talking about is empiricism. We're talking about shifting to something which is much more black and white in the space that we traditionally operate in. So it's about shifting mindset as much as it is about anything else, and then acquiring skills and expertise to do it.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think, Ahmed, your point about not coming from a data organization, I think is fair dues, because you don't have, like Michaela, a business analyst in the organization. But I think, Ahmed, one of the things I would say, we get involved at Towards Maturity in using data to shift conversations. And in fact, one of the organizations that we work with, where we were surfacing the learner intelligence within that organization, just having that insight together helped some of the learning leaders we were working with to open a conversation with managers and with directors about the way their organization learns in a way that opinion never did. So sometimes if an organization is not data driven, having some good, well-placed, well-communicated insights, it's harder to argue with. So I don't think it's a problem us being the first to bring data to an organization, not because we are statisticians, but because we're hungry to stimulate a new conversation. So I think you've made a really good point there, Ahmed. And to think that, Jess, you're talking about time, resources. I think this is a really, really important. And I guess, Anya, if yours is the opposite problem, I think that's a great opportunity as well, is that organizations becoming more data driven. It gives us an opportunity to say, we want to join you. Not that we have to bring our own data to the party, but to ask the organization what data they already have. And that could be one of the ways to help us to maybe overcome some of these barriers. So, you know, these insights are really powerful, and thank you so much for that. We asked the same question in our data pulse, and what was very interesting was we did it at the time of GDPR. Actually, this was a crazy thing when everyone was talking about data, and interestingly, it was only 2 in 5 of us in L&D said that actually legislation and data is something that we're worried about, that's holding us back. Much more so is very much what you're saying here in your in the group today, is that actually it's complicated. Engaging with the business, and even if we have got access to that data, how do we get it in one place so that we can do something with it? And I think converting those sources into one, I think is something that's very significant. But also, and this comes to Jez's point as well, and also some of your points in the room today, you know what? Even if it was all in one place, we don't necessarily know what to do with it. We don't all have access, like Michaela, to these data specialists. We're struggling with this, and we're hungry. And in fact, last year we saw that data analytics was one of the skills that really surfaced in our health check as being hungry to make a change in that place. So yes, there are some challenges that we need to go about. So part of what we wanted to do in this study is to say, well, where do we get started? And I think one of our challenges is that our starting point is completely understandably is a place of familiarity. We're gathering comfortable data, hours spent, dropout rates, completion rates, with tools that we are familiar with. Now, most of our work over the last number of years says that 80 to 90% of us have got a learning management system. And when we asked people in this pulse, how are you gathering data? It is mainly through their learning management system. We're comfortable, we're familiar with surveys. We're using surveys. So we can look at maybe net promoter scores, or we can look at opinions and how did you feel and reactions through our learning management systems. And those of us who are looking externally to data, other external, we're comfortable with doing that. We know to go to the Towards Maturity site, we'll download a report. But actually, that's not what research and data is about. Data isn't about what can we read up on and where can we go for something that's easy. Sometimes it's how do we look at other sources of data. Only 3 in 10 of us are looking at anecdote as data. Now, even if you look at some of the measurement methodologies like Brinkerhoff's case methodology, anecdote is important. We're working right now, right in the middle of our health check, where we're analysing right now anecdotally the real priorities of the industry right now and how to help them. Though that anecdotal data is so powerful, and it's a good place for us to start. It's a powerful place. We were talking also today, a meeting, even internally, about the data to push back to our own internal board members. And we would get the feedback, a powerful story can be as compelling at the board level as the final. Very few board level people are asking for return on investment, but what they are asking for is us to understand and show that we understand that there is a business problem that we're trying to challenge and that we're making headway in that. So, at the moment we're gathering comfortable data with comfortable tools, and it's an important aspect of this. And Erin, your point there about the right data at the right time to achieve the right thing is the critical thing here. And it also demystifies things. Just because you hear people at conferences saying, oh, we're using the learning record store and we're using this and we're using that, if that's not the right thing for you at this point in time, then we're chasing a dream, and when we can't get there, it frustrates us. So getting the right information is really, really important here. So what do we do with our data once we've gathered it in? What do we do with it? Now, this was quite shocking for us. Bear in mind that probably of the 29 different aspects of data that we explored in the pulse, most learning and development professionals were doing something with 14 of those areas: completion rates, dropout rates, the sorts of things we've already spoken about. But actually, 61% of us analyze that on a basic level. We just report back on the description. This has gone up, this has gone down, X% are doing this, 5% are liking us, all of that basic analysis. 35%, probably because the learning management systems are reporting that back, what's gone up, what's gone down, using dashboards, how we're collecting it, how we're communicating it. But actually only 28%, and apologies, I missed the name. We were talking earlier in the chat room about the role of making correlations, making relationships. Are there patterns in what we see in our data that allow us to start to predict, allow us to start to plan, allow us to start to think differently? Only 28% of us are going at that level, and actually only 10% are working with data specialists, and that might be because, as you already mentioned, we haven't got access. But interestingly, of all of those who are collecting data, there are still 1 in 10 of us who are collecting it, but we just don't do anything with it at all. So there's the challenge that we have really at the moment. We might have some great insights, but it's how we use those insights that are really important. And that was really where we wanted to apply some of our own thinking about that. We'd gathered in data from 140, 120 learning and development professionals around data. We knew some of them were successful at demonstrating impact on personalizing learning, but some weren't. So we started to analyze our data to say, okay, well, what contributes to success? Can we see any correlations that would help us demystify the journey into using data more effectively? And I'm going to kind of leave you with what we did and then open it up into conversation with us, because for us, what we looked at when we looked at this analysis is, what's the problem are you trying to solve? And then we said, okay, of all the things that we found out, what has a relationship with that problem? What data are you collecting that actually really helps you be more successful in solving that problem? What analysis process is most successful in helping you to solve that problem? And also, what communication process is successful in helping you solve that problem? So that's how we approach this, and this is what's going to be coming out, these pathways to success. So if you take the first challenge, we want to personalize learning, and we saw that, a small fraction were really successful in that. So when we looked at those small fraction of people, what were they doing that the rest of us weren't doing? Well, what's really interesting is the data that they were collecting was data that was related to the individual, understanding the individual. Where are they? When are they spending? What points are they dropping out? What's their profile? What are their interests? That data was really important in the success of personalizing learning. What had a negative correlation was course reaction. So again, you flagged up earlier, Erin, about the challenge of using the right data for the right thing. And sometimes just because we've got something doesn't mean to say it will help us. We were talking to an organisation quite recently where they were asking to look at issues of productivity, and they said, well, let's look at the issues of level 1 evaluation and see whether that can help us make a link. However you analyze that data, it's not going to make a link. So just because we've got data on course reaction doesn't mean to say that it will be able to personalize it. The other thing is that what do we do with that data that we gather about individuals? The detailed analysis about patterns of relationships, that's what really helped. And how we communicate, how do we connect, how do we make it visual? That also helped with personalizing learning. So this kind of pathway was a really important pathway. The other question that we looked at was a question of, how do we use external evidence to make a business case? So first and foremost, we went to benchmarking. Individual learning and development professionals, because we thought our hypothesis was that if you benchmark with peers, that you want to actually use that evidence to make a great business case internally. But what was really interesting for us was this was kind of a negative pathway. Most learning and development professionals, when they're thinking about benchmarking, it was very clear that they were benchmarking at the most fundamental input level. Learner data, total hours spent, the devices, are you using mobile, is so-and-so using mobile? We didn't look, in fact, it was a negative correlation in benchmarking about productivity and business goals. So when learning and development professionals are looking externally, well, they're actually looking at some of the things which are our inputs. How do we compare on inputs rather than how do we compare on outputs? And people are using that, we're using visualization, lots of impact, but actually we're putting a lot of analysis into our inputs. When it came down to making the business case, what was successful in making a great business case? It was not inputs. Completion rates did not help us make a great business case. Those that were successful in making the business case were focusing in on external key performance indicators, net promoter scores, industry, sector data. That data was being brought in to challenge the status quo. And to challenge the status quo, hold a mirror up, not around costs, not around completion rates, but around what's really important in the sector. And they were using data specialists to be able to analyze that, and were very clear around user data visualization tools as well. If they were making the business case, it wasn't great big long reports. It was about making something clear, making something simple, stimulating a view for a competitive requirement. So I think this is quite a significant element. So these are all different cases for using data, and the one that we started with and will close on is about demonstrating business impact as well. What was very interesting here, that those that were demonstrating business impact were more likely to be gathering data around the application of learning and productivity improvements. Ratings and NPS scores did not correlate to our ability to demonstrate business impact, but the application of learning and productivity improvement completely does. Working with data specialists to make the connection between the two and being very clear and simple about the way we communicate that all contributed to our success. And in the paper that we were going to be exploring, your HT2 labs have a great example of the work that they did with Villeroy and Bosch when they were doing a very significant change program within that. And they actually brought together independent data around sales conversions and data around reactions and connections within the environment of learning, and they were able to pull those two together to be able to articulate that business impact of how people were applying the learning, connecting with the learning, and also having a bottom line impact. So it's a great story for you to be able to connect with. So we've kind of illustrated a few pathways of using different data, analyzing it in different ways, and communicating it in different ways. All of these are really important. And Jez, I wondered if I could bring you back into this. Please ask questions in the chat room or comment through on this as Jez is speaking. But Jez, you know, are we asking, do you think, the right questions and gathering the right data at the right time to make the right decisions? What's your experience of that?
I think from my point of view, and possibly from Kineo's point of view, again, not everybody, and I put that as a caveat, but it's probably the exception rather than the rule, and it continues to be the exception rather than the rule. But from where I see that, if we get to the point before we start design by asking the right questions of a client in terms of really do they understand the problem that they're trying to solve, what is it that will look like? So if we get to that point of we've solved that problem, how will they know that we've solved that problem? Not just in terms of day-to-day feedback from the learner, but actually from a business perspective, from looking at what are the business levers that will be solved as a result of that. So, for example, one of the recent project that we worked on, we spent a lot of time up front with the L&D team understanding what the issue was. Now, the business had presented them with the problem. Yeah, we need to increase productivity in this. The customer satisfaction around this is poor. We need that to change. But rather than just saying, okay, so that the solution is a customer satisfaction training course, isn't it? So we'll just go and we'll turn that out. We didn't do that. What we did was we spent time with the client on picking what it was about customer satisfaction within that population that was having an impact, a negative impact on the productivity of that part of the business. And by that, we were then able to start to understand and unpick behaviours that were associated to that lack of performance. Therefore, the program could then be built around those behaviours. I mean, it sounds fairly straightforward, and it sounds like a classic training cycle. But there is a risk that we dive into a solution first, as opposed to actually really understanding the problem. And I think, from our experience, is if we'd have said, okay, you want to do a customer satisfaction course, and we've got examples of that, and you know that, we can build that, we wouldn't have hit the right buttons, because what we ended up with was something very, very different. We ended up with a program which was far more blended. We ended up with a program which was more socially led, which was more community based, which took the learning back into the workplace and created feedback loops around that. Ultimately, what we were really clear about right at the start was looking at how do we measure that, and we were able to look at this in terms of hard business stats. So what would the increase in terms of performance related to sales, performance related to customer retention, etc., but also then looking at customer feedback and doing some distance travelled around the types of customer feedback that we get. I think the interesting thing also is that if you are able to look at introducing some sort of control mechanism within that. So if you can do a thing with a group, so say if you're working in the sales environment, you can do the piece of training with one, and you then are able to then look at another group which you haven't done it. Is there a correlation between the performance of both those groups which can be associated to a particular piece of program? There's lots of things that we can do to unpick the impact that a program has if we get to the point of asking those right questions at the start, which really fundamentally is down to, is it the right problem? Do we understand what the problem is, and do we understand the behaviours that are associated to that, and are clearly defined how we're going to prove or disprove that that's the case? So, I think it's a long journey, and it's not something that necessarily you can just. I don't think our experience is that we just do it. It certainly takes quite a lot of effort and quite a lot of time to invest up front before you even get close to designing anything.
Yeah, and I think that's really an important. Oh, got a bit of echo there. I think it's a really important point that you're making there, Jez, is that we do need to analyse the problem before recommending a solution. And all of our annual health check process, so this is a fundamental characteristics of the high-performing organisation, that they know what they're trying to solve. And I think, Ahmed, you're talking here about building any training based on the problem that our customers are having. And, and using the opportunity to seek out data because we're hungry to solve the problem, rather than we're hungry to demonstrate pure ROI. I've spoken for quite some while based on our own journey with the data, that I do think that the desire to demonstrate return on investment all of the time is a real albatross for the learning and development community. It can be a weight around our necks because we feel that we don't have value, we don't have the right to talk at a business level if we aren't able to create a direct causation. And all of the insight from C-suite and all of the insight from our own data from 6,500 learning leaders show that actually demonstrating return on investment does not win business credibility. It does not make, but asking that right question up front, being inquisitive, wanting to work with the business to help them solve their solutions is much more powerful for business leaders and gets more buy-in from business leaders to the whole of the learning process than demonstrating at the end of it a return on investment. So, Brian, your comment there about taking skill on behalf of learning and development to tease out the problem. Leaders don't like it, but that's where also sometimes having a little bit of external data, Brian, helps. We've certainly said use our research to show the business impact that learning innovation can deliver when you're having a conversation with the business leaders to say, look, other people are achieving this. Is it worth us having a different conversation? So sometimes external data can help you, take the antagonism away from this, and just a hunger to find out more about what's going on in business. So some really interesting comments that are coming through here. Now, I'm conscious of the time, and we wanted to show here that good use of data comes down to asking the right question of the right people at the right time, and not using, as Erin so beautifully phrased it, vanity data to make us feel good or look good, or just a knee-jerk reaction. It's really important that we understand how we can go. So the question that I would like to leave you before I hand back to Jez is a very specific question about, is there anything that you've heard today that has made you think, you know what, looking at the data that has just been presented to me, there's something I want to do differently? Because actually, all of us are interested in data because we want to take great actions. So I'd like to kind of challenge you about saying, is there anything that you're willing to suggest in the chat room that we might like to do differently, think differently as a result of seeing some of this data today? Because that's actually what we want to use data for, is to achieve change. While you're thinking on that, you'll be able to register for this report and look at a number of different resources as well that we've created. We've opened it up just for the next hour or so. If you email resources@towardsmaturity.org, we'll send you back not only insights from this, but the new paper as soon as it's out. There's case studies. So that's just something to help you on your way. So a question for you, is there anything that you might like to do differently, or is there anything that you've seen today that you think, I do that already, I'm going to continue, to give us each other some encouragement? So I'm going to hand that to you as an audience, and then I'm going to hand back to Jez. So what are you going to do differently as a result of today? I love your problem. I love it. Thank you, Erin, on that. Do keep your comments coming, because actually probably your reflection now, even if you write it down on a post-it note and not into the chat room, is going to determine how valuable this last 45 minutes has been. Please feel free to open it into the chat as well. And Jez, I'm going to hand back to you to manage through on the rest.
Great, thank you. I'm just looking at what's come through there.
I'm insistent on what the solution will look like, yeah. Definitely. Renata, you've got friends.
Fascinating. I think the key is for me is that is not as, in some ways, it's not trying to solve the problem yourself of learning and development. That we are part of something bigger, and we're part of an organisation. And I think in some ways, it's always a battle, and it always has been a battle to understand how to use data best and use it well. I think there's an issue that we don't necessarily always tap into the data that's available to us. Or even interpret the data. And I think some of the insight that Laura shared with us is clear that the data may well be there, but we're not actually asking the right questions of it. So I think it's very important that spend some time, even if it's just the simple data that we offer and have available to us, that we maybe change some of our behaviour around that. Some of the points when we just did a little bit of a quick search on the net around it and where organisations see data. Only 33% of us have data-driven culture, so we're not on our own, and that's not just LRD, that's more broadly. And I think although it's there and it's part of everyday language now, the reality of it is that we don't really know quite how to use it yet. It's that another one of those classic things that the speed of technology, the speed of change has probably overtaken all of us, and what we're trying to do now is desperately catch up with that. And that's okay. The key, I think, is trying now to acquire the skills, acquire the tools that will help us do that. Data is seen as a byproduct of a business process or activity, yeah, but it shouldn't be. In some ways, what it should be seen as something driving business process and activity as much as the byproduct of it. It's through that insight that we gain through good data analytics that we can start to inform and change our decision making. So in some ways, 3 key points. Always good to end on 3 points. Accepting joint responsibility. I'd sort of challenged ourselves a little bit since the slide. I'd sort of take some responsibility. So maybe not about accept, we'll actually take it. You know, own some of this stuff. Start asking some difficult questions. And maybe that's about reaching out to other parts of the business, starting to engage with managers in a different way than just being seen as the custodians of knowledge. Actually, what we're trying to do is we're trying to help and steer organisations and individuals to making the right choices around what information that they need themselves to have better impact on their organisation, and then being able to make. Okay, so I'm not sure if people are still following or not. We've had some audio problems. Apologies for those that lost us. I hope it's been a useful, what is in essence probably 55 minutes, and given you some insight and some food for thought. I've enjoyed it. I've enjoyed especially listening to Laura and the insight that she shared as part of her pulse check. Always fascinated to read that research and what it means for us as part of this community. So again, thank you very much for taking part, and we'll any questions, then please feel free to let us know. If you want to comment via via Laura's the email address that we'll put up now, which is for any hints and tips that people may want to share with us around data, that'd be great. Or if you've got any other questions, then please feel free to do it that way. So all the best. Thank you very much for your time, and have a great afternoon. Goodbye.
Goodbye, everyone.